I've been working as a police officer in San Diego, California for more than 15 years. More specifically, I was a police canine holder. There were some rough moments on the job, but one made me see how excruciating it really is. On March 3rd, 2022, at approximately 12:38 p.m., the San Diego Police Department, where I was working, received a request for urgent cover from the Sheriff's Department at a residence not far from where we were. The request was that a woman had been given paperwork after receiving several eviction notices. When the deputies tried to talk with the woman and tried to give her the paperwork, they saw a big knife in her hand. She was uncooperative and slammed her front door shut, then barricaded it. That's when I, along with the whole police department, was called for backup. When we got to the given address, I, along with the K-9 unit, was told to wait outside the lobby in case needed. We were later called to enter the unit as an additional, less lethal option. We got to the area, and one of the deputies broke down the door. Some other officers and I walked through the door, and we went into the apartment. We all have been calling for her to come out with her hands up, but she just wouldn't listen. We were able to see the woman in the room with an open door, and one deputy named Officer Jason kept shooting warning shots at the wall for her to obey and not to do this the hard way. Right in an instant, we saw the woman charging at us with a knife. We were backing up and out into the hallway, and Jason just kept trying to shoot her, but he was missing. When this didn't work, the woman swung the knife at us, which happened to land on my chest for a second or two, and then it was taken out. This prompted one of the other officers to shoot the woman with gunfire. She was struck at least once, and then she immediately was dead at the scene. I could barely move now. I was in a lot of pain. I screamed out that I got stabbed, but it seemed like no one acknowledged me just yet. Then, around 5 seconds later, an officer asked if anyone was hurt, and I yelled out that I had been stabbed once again. I was immediately rushed to the hospital, and I knew I wasn't going to die. I was fortunate enough to get treated for my stab wounds, and not too long after, I was released from the medical center. I soon found out that the woman who stabbed me and was shot and killed was 47-year-old woman named Yan Lee. She had been receiving many eviction notices, but she kept refusing to accept them. She also apparently threatened one of the maintenance workers with a knife the previous day before she died. I was able to move on from this incident, but I will never forget the feeling of having so much pain in my body.
My name is Jake, and this is my experience. This happened in South Texas back in 2004, around Halloween time. My friends Michael and Joey were looking for something exciting to do. We used to ride our bikes at night exploring the surrounding neighborhoods where we lived. We noticed an abandoned barn about a quarter mile off the road in between two cornfields, and decided to check it out. The path was long and dark. It was away from the dimly lit streetlight. The corn stalks hovered over the narrow path leading to the barn. It almost felt like I was being entrapped. Had it not been for the full moon, it would have been pitch black dark inside the barn. Thankfully, our flashlights, running low on battery, were enough to illuminate the way inside to check it out. We must have stuck around for 10 to 15 minutes, exploring until a strange feeling set in, that someone or something was watching us from within the corn stalks. I told them, "Hey guys, let's head back. It's getting late." They agreed, so we headed back to our bikes to head back down the dark path to the main road, which at this point felt and looked further than a quarter mile. Michael and Joey wanted to race each other to the main road, so they sped off, leaving me behind in the dust. As they sped off ahead, I slowly started biking towards them, when suddenly I noticed corn stalks start to move heading toward my direction. This frightened me, so I picked up the pace, pedaling faster, and as I did, I noticed the dark figure started moving faster, parallel to me. I shouted, "Hey guys, hold up!" The noise of the tires speeding over the gravel drowned out my shout though. My friends couldn't really hear me or make out what I was saying. I tensed up, because I could feel this object was going to tackle me off my bike at any moment. It was hard to get a good glimpse of it without breaking my focus on pedaling fast, straight forward towards the main streetlight. But I could tell this thing was taller than myself, and I was around 5 foot plus at the time. At this point, my friends had reached the main road under the streetlight. I kept thinking I just need to reach the streetlight. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I finally reached the light. The dark figure stopped a few feet before the light and completely ceased to move. I biked past my friends, and they immediately followed as they noticed the terrified look on my face. Once we got more into an area with neighborhoods and light, we slowed down. I shared with them the frightening experience, and they were left in silence, not sure what to make of it. We never did go back to that area at night. I had no interest in ever going back, period. I don't know what that thing was. It definitely wasn't a human. But it was very reminiscent of that Jeepers Creepers thing that I used to see in those movies. If anybody has any idea what could have been stalking us that night, please, let me know in the comments.
A quick disclaimer before this episode. Many of the names are Mandarin and Cantonese. I did my best to try to get the pronunciations correct, but I'm sure I butchered quite a few of them. Please forgive me. On May 16th, 1997, a 999 call was made from Hong Kong's Kowloon district. The caller was a middle-aged man who incoherently told the operator that he was seriously injured and needed an ambulance to bring him to the hospital. He then hung up after a series of barely intelligible words. The ambulance arrived 30 minutes later and rushed him to the United Christian Hospital in Kwang Tong district. At the hospital, the man was delirious and unable to explain where his injuries came from or even the injuries at all, just that he was injured. After a doctor examined him, he noted several bruises and fractured bones, likely from a beating, prompting the doctor to inform the police. Police spent several hours questioning the man in the hospital until they finally learned his information. The man lived in an apartment building in Kwang Tong district and was identified as 36-year-old Chan Muk-ching, and he worked as a sanitation worker at the time. Chan did not know for sure who had attacked him, and he could only identify two of them by nicknames, A.B. and A. Chick. These two people lived in the Sao Mao Ping estate, which is across the street from the payphone Muk-ching called the police from. At 12 a.m. on May 17th, police rushed to the apartment to track down and question those two mentioned previously. Now, while the one known as A. Chick was nowhere to be found, they did find and were able to arrest A. B., whose real name was Shi Jian, a 16-year-old student. Several accomplices were also detained. The police only made the arrest to question them over Muk-ching's beating, but all those questioned seemed to have a different idea and confessed to something much more, horrifying. All of those arrested were under the age of 18, and yet in spite that they were all gang members and identified themselves as something called triads. In my research for this story, I did have to do a little bit of digging into what the triads were. Now, I've heard the name thrown around, I've seen some movies with them mentioned, but I never really knew what it was. And unlike something like the Yakuza, the triads have a bit more of an overtly political origin. Meaning that instead of just being, say, organized crime or something along the mafia, these groups have more higher ambitions, if you will. The oldest and leader, A. Chick, whose true identity was 17-year-old Hugh Chi Y, who, like Muk-ching, was employed as a cleaner. Hugh Chi also had a record, as in 1996 he was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment for a petty assault. He also frequently rallied up others to quote-unquote go to war and fight and beat up other teen gangs. Most of them also had records for other petty crimes, and the police found reason to visit Sao Mao Ping several times before this case. Muk-ching was attacked by the gang as while on shift working and cleaning in the area, he would attempt to persuade others to leave the gangs and continue their education to try and better their futures. Hugh Chi Y saw this as a problem, but violence wasn't his first choice. He would start by trying to intimidate him and in other times using his female friends to try and seduce Muk-ching in hopes that this would motivate him to stop. Hugh Chi would also set small fires in the area to further intimidate him, but Muk-ching never gave up. And even more aggravating, his words were actually reaching other gang members. Most notably, 15-year-old Luk Chi Y seemed genuinely eager to change his ways and leave the crime world behind.
He only seemed to be in the gang for the relationships with others and was always reluctant to get involved in criminal activity. Instead, he would prefer to stay back with Muk Ching and help him with his cleaning work and duties. On May 12th, Hugh Chi didn't want to do his part-time job simply out of laziness, and while he was inside, Muk Ching ended up meeting his mother and explained to her what her son had been up to, and she was shocked. She then told his father, and both of his parents were outraged and scolded and chewed him out. Hugh Chi paid them no mind until later that afternoon. Once they left, he gathered up a bunch of friends. He found Muk Ching on his shift, and then they rushed towards him. They spent 2 hours beating him. Once this was over, Luk Chi found out what happened and rushed toward him after everyone left to tend to his wounds, and even tried encouraging him to contact the police. 2 days later, on May 14th, Hugh Chi heard of this encounter. They were all angered at Luk Chi's actions, and thus sought to make him pay for his quote-unquote backbone. At 9 p.m., he was lured into the exact apartment of Sao Mao Ping where the other members stayed. Hugh Chi couldn't take part due to family and personal issues at the time, so in his place, 17-year-old Fu Hin Chun orchestrated the beating. Hin Chun, in 1993, was sentenced alongside another involved 17-year-old Mak Kaho to 1 year of behavior therapy and treatment for a robbery. Others involved were 14-year-old Zhu Jiang, 16-year-old Ming Chung, who was also in a 1993 conviction for theft, 14-year-old Ron Kit Yi, 16-year-old Chan Tak Ming, who had also had a 1995 conviction for his involvement in a street fight, 14-year-old Li Pi, 14-year-old Wong Kang Ho, and 14-year-old Zhu Zhan Chen Kang Go were all involved. There were several other names as well, but to save me and everybody listening to this video, I'm not going to try to say everybody's names. Once Luke Chi arrived, the beating started in full force immediately. They attacked him with their hands and feet before escalating to folding chairs like WWE. Once Hugh Chi was done and his family issues, he had returned home, and once he saw that the beating was still going on half an hour later, he joined in on the beating. Luke Chi was getting beat with a plastic pipe at the time. They continued for 3 hours until Luke Chi finally passed away from his injuries. All those involved suddenly became scared and fearful, as despite their lengthy list of crimes, this was the first time they had ever murdered someone. Some wanted to call the police themselves and turn in themselves, while others suggested finding a black market doctor to see if they could resuscitate Luke Chi. Hugh Chi and Hin Chun calmed everyone down, and eventually they settled on carrying the body to an abandoned building while others went out to purchase gasoline. Another member of the group suggested disposing of the body in the mountainous areas to be scavenged by wild animals or a landfill to go undiscovered. Acting under Hin Chun's orders, they removed the now burnt clothes from the body and tied it up with bed sheets and wires. Afterwards, Hugh Chi and Chan Tak went out to talk and look for a cart to use to transport the body. But coincidentally, a police patrol happening in the area stopped them. During this time, according to Muk Ching, they were seriously injured and hiding in his home, too afraid to go to the police due to Luke Chi being nowhere to be seen and the rest of the gang threatening him. Due to that well-timed police patrol, the gang had to delay disposing Luke Chi's body, but this time was used to purchase some acid and other tools needed to hinder identification and move the body, as well as think of a possible new plan. In the moment, they placed the corpse into a cardboard box, which they then sealed shut with tape. They put a bunch of items and belongings into the box so it would look like they were disposing of garbage. They lifted the box into a cart and began moving it towards the apartment's garbage disposal room. The specific block of the apartment they picked was due to be demolished soon, and most of the residents had already moved out, so they figured the body would still be undiscovered, as well as what they did to it. Once they arrived, Hin Chun had others act as lookouts and pretend to carry furniture on the off chance that someone else came by. They then poured acid and gasoline onto his body before setting it on fire. Afterwards, they waited outside for 2 hours or more until the fire naturally burnt itself out. Once that had finally happened, they stuffed the body back into the box and waited for a garbage truck to come and carry it off to the landfill, which is what eventually happened. The next day, on May 16th, was when Muk Ching called the police, which ended up leading to this murder being exposed. Some members of the gang on that same day had felt guilty and went to their other non-gang member friends who they knew to try and confess and turn themselves in, but nobody would believe them and thought that they were just trying to build up some reputation by telling a fake story. Once all was said and done, the police were absolutely floored, since they never even knew Luke Chi was missing, and only arrested them to talk to them about Muk Ching's, assault. But instead, they all confessed to this other murder with little to no prompting from them. In fact, the police struggled to even believe them likewise, thinking that they were probably just lying to build up infamy. Adding to their skepticism was the inconsistent nature of their confessions, with some trying to claim that others did it alone and drag them into it, and others sharing the blame entirely with the team. Pretty much they were hearing 20 different excuses as to why everybody involved wasn't really responsible. Regardless, the police were obligated to investigate, so they headed to the garbage room in that block of the apartment. Police found 2 plastic pipes, a folding chair, a white blanket, a red bucket, a white gasoline barrel, an electric fan, and a pile of charred debris and signs of a fire. But due to the lack of any human remains at the scene, they still couldn't determine that someone had been killed there. The police afterwards went to the local landfill and deployed 120 officers and 4 sniffer dogs who spent 6 hours searching. But after scouring through several hundreds of tons of garbage and waste, no trace of Luke Chi's remains were actually found anywhere. On May 18th, Hin Chun was arrested after his parents compelled and forced him to turn himself in. Hin Chun confessed as well as confirmed to the police that everything said by the others was in fact the truth. Forensic officials combed through the garbage room and extracted some traces of human tissue from the charred debris and objects. But unfortunately, there was way too much damage to use any sort of reasonable information from that DNA, but they were able to identify that the DNA did belong to a child or teenager, and naturally the cause of death was impossible to determine based on this alone. This was enough evidence for the police to know that a murder had taken place, and on May 20th, every single one of those teenagers were charged with the murder of Luke Chi, despite his body remaining missing. The trial for this case proved to be very challenging. Due to the lack of a body and contradicting confessions from everybody, and also many of them later recanting those confessions, it made it really hard for the police to figure out who was the leader and what blame belonged where. Now, Shi Jian was granted immunity to murder charges as long as he offered testimony against everybody he was friends with in that group who participated in this murder. Muk Ching was also not able to testify or do much here because mental issues he suffered from the attack made him unable to testify in court. Somewhere around 9 p.m. on May 14th, Muk Ching was called to come to the apartment via a phone call, wanting to discuss something with him. After entering, Hu Chi and a couple of assailants were all waiting. Within seconds of him entering, Hin Chun and other assailants instantly began to punch him and kick him, forcing him onto the ground, shouting at him to confess and beg them for mercy. Hin Chun then got a folding chair and opened it to place the legs over his head to stop him from moving. Then he grabbed a pair of nunchucks and repeatedly kept hitting him with it, screaming questions at him such as, "Why did you betray us?" But no matter what answer Hin Chun responded with, they just hit him again. Afterwards, Hin Chun was crying out for help when others would pick up his legs, holding him upside down with his head pointed towards the ground, and repeatedly slammed the top of his head against the floor in a move they referred to as a human pile driver. Very similar to The Undertaker's finishing move, which he used throughout his illustrious career in the WWE and WWF. If you're not familiar with this, I will show something on screen. Once they were done, he quickly collapsed to the ground. But things weren't over quite yet. Chan Tak Ming forced a bunch of dates into his mouth while Jin Bao, Zhu Zhun, Shi Jian, and others showed up, having not been present for most of the beating. This is also when Luke Chi was given a brief break while somebody named Lin Chun told him to get up and start cleaning and mopping around. Obviously, after being beaten pretty profusely, this would be quite a interesting task to undertake. While doing this though, a female, somebody who apparently went to school with the boys, claimed that Luke Chi had humiliated her at school. So, she slapped him, and then another boy hit him with an umbrella to show support. This riled up everyone up again, prompting the whole group to jump in and attack him. Now, the brutality unfortunately did not stop there. Another one of the boys would hit him very hard in the back and neck to force him down to his knees with a wooden stick. He would then put him in front of a statue of Guang Gong to repent. Hu Chi and Chan Tak also repeatedly beat him with their own wooden sticks. While doing this, somebody else was trying to punch him and kick him at the same time. By now, his body was so bruised all over and his feet were starting to bleed, and they just weren't letting up. This is when they decided to play some sort of poetry recital type game. At least that's what I think this translation means. Basically, one of them would be called by their nickname, and then they would repeatedly punch and kick like Chuck on their own. So this essentially means that pretty much every single person in that group at the time, maybe excluding one or two, got to at least beat him individually at least once. They had tired themselves out and started to smoke, and once they were done, 3 or 4 of those involved stuffed the cigarette butts into his mouth. By now, he could barely move, and had begged for mercy, and that he wouldn't do anything more and would never betray anybody again, and that he couldn't go on any much longer. But that's when somebody took him to the bathroom to wash his face, and once they returned, somebody was trying to argue on his behalf and convince them that Luke Chi had suffered enough. A bunch of people tried to force him to kneel again and apologize in spite of him having already done so several times. He knelt down, but before he could even speak, another person suddenly kicked him right in the face, while somebody else hit him with a folding chair. Now at this point, I'm sure you're wondering, how much further could they possibly take this without just killing the poor guy? And I have that same opinion. Now, I know I've made some comparisons to the WWE, but really, hitting somebody with a steel chair, folding chair, whatever, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's almost as if they thought this was some sort of video game and treated it like that. Now at this point, most of the group had left, whether it was from fear of being caught, not wanting him to actually die on their own time, or just leaving because they had something else to do. Who could really say? I can say, from what I understand, 2 people returned back, and they had pipes with them. Plastic pipes again. At some point, they were worried about him looking bad, so they would wash him up in the bathroom, put his clothes back on, and try to get him to walk out. From what I can understand, they were getting a bit angered because he was not able to walk on his own, and at this point it was clear that he was likely going to die from the beating he had sustained. So, to take this issue into their own hands, I can almost bet you know what they decided to do. They called up another friend, all 3 of them came together with plastic pipes, and they beat him absolutely mercilessly until he was lifeless. Their only response after he passed out was to try to drag him to the bathroom once more, pour more cold water all over him to wake him up, so they could continue to beat him more. When he passed out, he never woke up again, and this happened at least 2 or 3 times that I know of. They didn't realize that he had died until about 12:30 a.m., where they then proceeded to dispose of his body in the manner described above, where they burned him and then threw him out like garbage. Now, as mentioned earlier in the story, one of the witnesses and people who partook in this, Shi Zijin, had testified with immunity. Once the trial began at the Hong Kong High Court, the main question was how accurate his testimony would be, especially when it came down to who delivered the final blow. The prosecution called upon their own doctor to refute. He argued that the material, length, and hardness of the plastic pipes were not enough to cause fatal wounds, and whatever killed Luke Chi likely happened earlier, and it took him some time to die as a result from it. The doctor testified that it wasn't one single blow that caused Luke Chi's death, and instead, all the injuries accumulated and resulted in a hemorrhage, meaning that all the participants shared culpability. It was even argued that he may have still been alive, but with a weak pulse while they were putting his body in that box to dispose of. The judge sided with the prosecution and argued that all involved, except the one with immunity, would be charged with murder regardless of how mild they were in any of the assaults. Now, on January 27th, 1999, the jury returned with their verdicts. Hugh Chi was found guilty of murder and preventing the burial of a body and was given a life sentence. An appeal court reduced the sentence to 30 years and then later 25. Ma Ka-ho was convicted of the same charges and sentenced to 26 years imprisonment. He appealed his sentence, and in May of 2001, the appeal court convicted him only of assault and preventing the burial of a body and was given a reduced sentence of only 7 years. Ming Chun was given a life sentence, although an appeal reduced it to 25 years. Ruong Kit-ye was convicted of assault and preventing the burial of a body and was given 42 months in prison with time served factored in. Now, there's a bunch more names involved, and they all got very similar sentences. None of them really got more than 20 to 30 years, and then most of them appealed down to probably about 15 or less. The sentences were all appealed, like I said, and most of them were accepted because the defense lawyers and presiding judge neglected sentencing guidelines for those who were juvenile at the time of the offense. So, even though they did get some time, I don't think true justice was served here. All have since been released and are now free with the exception of one who committed suicide, jumping off a building in December 25th of 2007. To this day, Luke Chi's body has never been discovered, and his disappearance would have likely remained unsolved if Chan Muk Ching had not gathered the courage to call that 999 call that day.
I work in the back of a grocery store in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm not going to tell you which one. If you ever find the door yourself, you won't need directions. From the outside, it looks like any other place. Automatic doors, shelves stocked too tight, freezers that hum louder than they should. You've probably been in one just like it. Everyone has, and that's kind of the point. The part I work on isn't on the floor. It's behind it. Past the swinging double doors where employees go in and out all day without thinking about it. Stockroom area, pallets stacked unevenly, boxes labeled wrong, cleaning supplies shoved into corners. The smell back there is always a mix of cardboard, cold air, and whatever leaked last. There's a hallway at the very back. Most people don't see it. Even employees don't go down there unless they're told to. It's narrow, concrete walls, one flickering light overhead. At the end of it, there's a metal door. No label, no handle on the outside. Just a keypad mounted to the wall next to it. And that's where I work. I didn't apply for this job in any normal way. There was no posting, no interview, no paperwork. I got a message through someone I used to work with, a guy who handled cleanup contracts for places that didn't want questions asked. He said there was a job that paid real well. Said I'd be working indoors. Said I'd be alone most of the time. I asked what I'd be cleaning. He told me, "You don't want to know, but you'll figure it out." The first thing they gave me wasn't a uniform or a badge. It was a list. Industrial bleach. Not the stuff you buy in stores, even stronger. Gloves. Thick enough that you don't feel what you're touching. Heavy-duty bags, sealed at the top. A scraper. A second scraper. Smaller, for corners. They were specific about that part. I remember asking why I needed two. They told me, "You'll understand after your first shift." And they weren't wrong. The pay is $10,000 per job. Flat rate. Doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as you come back. That's the part they don't say out loud, but it's understood. You only get paid if you come back. They don't track hours. They don't check in on you. You go in, you do the job, and you come out. If you don't come out, they replace you. That's the system. The door leads to what they call the Backrooms. I don't know who named it. I don't know where it came from. All I know is that it exists, and it shouldn't. People fall into it sometimes. Not often, but enough there's a system in place to deal with it. Wrong step, wrong place, wrong moment. You're walking somewhere normal, and suddenly you're not. Most of those people don't come back. Some of them do, but not in a way that helps anyone. And that's where I come in. I don't go down there to explore. I don't go down there to figure anything out. I go down there after something's already happened. After someone made a mistake. After something went wrong. I clean up what's left. Sometimes it's small. A section of carpet that won't come clean no matter how much bleach you use. A trail that leads nowhere. Equipment dropped and never picked back up. You bag it up, you wipe it down, and you follow the arrows back out. Other times it's not small. They don't warn you ahead of time, they just say, bring extra. Extra bleach, extra bags, extra gloves. That's how you know. I don't ask questions anymore. Early on I did try. I asked where the place came from, why the door was there, why it moved. That's another thing. They told me the location changes every 6 years. Same door, different place. Nobody knows why or how. Right now, it's here. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Back of a grocery store nobody thinks about twice. Within 6 years, it won't be. I asked what happens when it moves. They told me, you won't be our problem anymore. That was the end of the conversation. Now, the first time I went through the door, I expected something dramatic. Noise, cold air, pressure. Something to tell me I was stepping into a different place. There wasn't anything like that. You open the door, you step through, and you're just there. Walls as far as you can see. The space doesn't make sense. Hallways stretch too long. Turns don't line up right. You can walk in a straight line and end up somewhere you shouldn't be. That's why the arrows matter. You don't question them, you don't try to understand them, you just follow them. Or you don't come back. My first job was simple. That's what they told me at least. Small cleanup. I didn't know what that meant yet. I brought what they told me to bring, bleach bags, gloves, tools. I found the spot they marked. I did the job. Took less than an hour. And when I came out, I understood why they gave me the list. I also understood why the pay was what it was. I've been doing this long enough now that I don't think about quitting. Not because I like it, I don't. But once you understand how this place works, you start to realize something. Someone has to do it. Because the jobs don't stop. There's always another one waiting. Before my first real shift, they gave me 6 rules. No explanation or discussion, just a list. And they told me to follow them exactly. Rule 1. Always follow the yellow arrows. The arrows are the only thing there that don't change. Everything else does. You'll notice them right away on your first run. Bright yellow spray paint, usually at waist height. Sometimes lower, sometimes higher, depending on the wall. They point down hallways, around corners, through open spaces that don't look like they should connect to anything. There's no pattern to where they show up, but once you see one, you follow it. That's the job. Nobody told me who put them there. Wasn't part of the briefing, and it wasn't on any of the paperwork I never signed. But you can tell they weren't done all at once. Different strokes, thickness, some cleaner than others, different cans, different hands. It's been built up over a long time. Every janitor leaves a few behind. That's how the system works. Before my first real job, they walked me through it in the stock room. Not inside the back rooms, just standing in front of the door with a keypad. Follow the arrows, the guy said. Only the yellow ones. What about faded ones? I asked. Don't follow them. What about if they look close? They're not, he said. That was the whole conversation. The first time you're in there long enough, you start to understand why they're so specific about the color. The lighting down there, it's not stable. It buzzes, flickers, shifts just enough that colors don't always look the same from one hallway to the next. Yellow can look like orange if the light drops. It can look pale if you're too far away. It can look like something else entirely if you're tired. That's how people make mistakes. The job I remember the most was my 3rd week. Not the worst one I've had, but the first one where I had to make a decision that actually mattered. They sent me in with a standard load. Bleach, 2 sets of gloves, 4 bags, scraper. Medium job, they said. That usually means there's more than one spot to deal with, but nothing spread out too far. I went in, picked up the first arrow, and started moving. The path was clean. Straight lines, clear turns, nothing complicated. That's usually a good sign. Means someone came through recently and updated the route. You can tell when a path's been used a lot. The carpet gets worn down along the edges. The walls have marks where people brushed past too many times. About 15 minutes in, I came to a split. 2 hallways, both narrow, both the same color, same lighting, same smell. That's normal. What wasn't normal was that there were arrows pointing down both. One was the usual bright yellow, fresh enough that you could still see where the paint had dripped slightly at the bottom. The other one was close. Same shape, same direction, same size. Just a little bit off. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't catch it. But once you've been down there a few times, you start noticing the difference. The real ones, they're consistent. The color doesn't shift no matter where you stand. The edges are rough in the same way. There's a kind of confidence to them. The other one didn't have that. It looked right, but it didn't feel right. I stood there for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I could see how easy it would be to get it wrong. Same direction, placement, close enough that if you were a little tired or a little rushed, or thinking about anything other than that arrow right in front of you, you'd take it without a second thought. I took a step toward it anyway. Just one. And the hallway didn't change right away. You don't cross some clear line where everything suddenly shifts. It's gradual. You walk a few steps, maybe 10 or 20, and things start to feel off in a way you can't point to directly. I turned around and walked back. You don't run unless you have to, and this wasn't one of those times. I stepped back into the intersection, stood there for a second, looking at both arrows again, and the difference was more obvious now. The real one was solid, bright, didn't shift no matter how much the lights flickered overhead. The other one looked duller, like it was absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Same shape and direction, but wrong. I went the right way. The job site wasn't far after that. Maybe another 5 minutes down the correct path. It was what I expected for a medium job. Not small, not spread out, enough that I used most of what I brought with me. While I was working, I found something near the wall. A bucket. Same kind we have. Same brand, lid cracked open slightly. I walked over and nudged it with my boot before touching it. That's standard. You don't grab anything down there without checking it first, believe me. It didn't move. I crouched down and opened it the rest of the way. There was dried residue inside. Darkened, hardened, uneven along the sides, like it'd been sitting there a long time. No tools or gloves or bags. Just the bucket. Someone had made it that far. They just didn't make it back. I closed it and left it where it was. You don't carry extra weight out unless you're told to. That's another part of the job. You don't fix everything. You do what you're assigned and you leave the rest. On the way back, I passed the intersection again. Both arrows were still there. I didn't look at the wrong one this time, not even for a second. I stayed on the correct path and followed it all the way back to the door. When I got out, I told them about it. 2 arrows, I said. Same split. They didn't react much. Which one did you follow? The bright one, I said. He nodded. That was it. No explanation or follow-up, just confirmation I made the right call. After that, I started noticing it more. Not every run, but often enough. Arrows that were almost right. Paths that looked usable if you didn't pay close attention. It's not random, it's consistent in the way it shows up. Like something down there is trying to copy the system. Close enough to trick you, not close enough to save you. Now I don't hesitate. If the color isn't exact, I don't touch it. I don't step toward it. I don't test it. I don't try to see where it goes. There's no upside to checking. There's only one outcome if you're wrong. You will never come back. Rule 2. Never stay longer than 120 minutes. They give you a timer before every shift. Not optional or a suggestion. You check it before you go in, you start it the second you cross the door, and you don't argue with it once it's running. 2 hours, 120 minutes. That's the limit. Nobody explains why. The first few runs, you won't feel anything different. You go in, follow the arrows, do the job, come back out. 40 minutes, maybe an hour. Plenty of time left on the clock. Feels manageable. And that's how I get you comfortable. The deeper jobs are where it changes. The ones where they tell you ahead of time to bring extra supplies. Extra bleach and bags, thicker gloves. That usually means you're going further in, following longer routes, spending more time in areas that haven't been touched in a long time. That's when the timer starts to matter. The run where I learned the limit wasn't anything special on paper. Standard assignment, deeper than usual but not flagged as high risk. I brought what they told me to bring and went in like any other shift. The route was longer than most. More turns, fewer straight lines. The arrows were still clear, but they weren't as fresh. Some of them had been painted over older marks. You could see layers underneath if you looked close enough. That usually means the path's been adjusted more than once. I kept moving. By the time I reached the site, I was already over an hour in. I checked the timer before I started. 58 minutes left. Enough time if I didn't waste it. The job itself was spread out. Not one spot, but a series of smaller areas along the same section of hallway. That's worse than a single location. You have to move between them, keep track of what you've already handled, make sure you're not doubling back without realizing it. Well, I worked through it steady. No rushing or shortcuts. You don't get sloppy down there, no matter how much time you think you have. That's how you turn a medium job into something else. When I finished, I checked the timer again. 12 minutes left. And that's where most people make the mistake. They see time on the clock and they think it means they have room to move, room to adjust, maybe take a quicker path back, maybe check something they passed on the way in. I didn't do any of that. I turned and I followed the arrows back exactly the way I came. The first few minutes were normal. Same halls, same turns, same hum from the lights overhead. And then something started to feel off. Not obvious, nothing I could point to right away. Just wrong. I reached a corner I clearly remembered, a left turn marked by a double arrow, one above the other. I took it, walked about 20 steps, and stopped. The hallway in front of me looked familiar. Too familiar. I turned around and looked back. Same corner, same double arrow, same angle on the wall. It shouldn't have been there behind me, not like that. I checked the timer. 7 minutes left. I didn't panic. Not yet. Panic makes you move faster than you should, and speed doesn't help if you're going the wrong way. I stepped back to the corner and I looked at the arrows again. They were right. Same color and placement, no difference I could see. I picked one and followed it. Another hallway, another turn, another stretch that felt like I'd already walked it. The place wasn't changing in front of me. It was changing around me. Subtle shifts, corners repeating, distances stretching just enough that things didn't line up the way they should. I checked the timer again. 4 minutes. And that's when I heard something. It wasn't right behind me. It was off to the side, somewhere parallel to where I was walking. A steady sound, like something moving at the same pace I was. I didn't look for it. That's another part of the job. You don't go looking for what you hear unless you absolutely have to. And most of the time you don't. I kept moving. The arrows were still there. Still bright. Still consistent. That's the only thing that didn't change. I locked onto them and stopped paying attention to everything else around me. The hallway opened up ahead into a wider section. I recognized it immediately. Not because of the shape, but because of the floor. I'd been there earlier. I knew it because I'd cleaned it. There was a section of carpet I'd worked on at the start of the job. It had taken longer than it should have. I remember thinking it didn't come clean the way it was supposed to, not completely. Now I was looking at it again. I checked the timer. 2 minutes. The sound off to the side was still there, closer now. I followed the arrows. One more turn, straight line. Another arrow ahead, brighter than the rest. That's something you learn to recognize. The ones closest to the exit are usually the clearest, repainted more often, maintained better. I moved toward it, and the hallway stretched longer than it should have, but the arrow stayed in place, didn't shift or move, and that's how you know you're on the right path. The sound behind me was getting closer. I reached the last turn and I saw the door. Same as always, metal, no handle on this side, just the outline against the wall where it doesn't quite fit right. I checked the timer one last time. 30 seconds. I crossed through and I shut the door behind me, and the sound stopped immediately. I stood there in the stockroom for a moment without moving. When I finally looked back at the door, it was exactly the way it always is. Closed, sealed, nothing coming through. Too close, kid. Way too close. That's why we give you the timer, a man said. That was it. Well, after that, I always gave myself 15 minutes breathing room for every job. If you screw up and you stay even 1 second too long, you do not get extra time, ever. After 2 hours, the place stops letting you leave. Rule 3. If you enter a room full of mascots, go to a corner and stay completely still. They don't warn you about which rooms you're going to get. There's no map, no list of locations to avoid, no briefing that tells you what kind of space you're walking into. You follow the arrows, you reach the job site, and whatever's there is what you deal with. Some rooms look like everything else. Same walls and carpet and lighting. Others don't. The Mascot Room is one of the ones that doesn't. The first time I saw it, I wasn't alone. They don't usually send 2 people down unless they expect a larger job, something spread out or heavier than normal. And that's how I met Brian Keller. He'd been working longer than I had. Not by much, but enough that he moved like he knew what he was doing. We didn't talk much. Nobody really does down there. You keep it simple, stick to the path, get to the site, do the job, and leave. Before we went in, they told us to bring extra. Bleach, bags, second set of tools. That usually means the job isn't contained to one spot. It is something much bigger, more to deal with. We went through the door and followed the arrows like usual. The path started normal. Straight halls, clean markings, nothing off. After about 20 minutes, the space started to open up. Wider walls, higher ceiling. That happens sometimes. Not often, but enough that you don't question it right away. Then we hit the entrance. It wasn't a door, just an opening in the wall, wider than the hallway, leading into a room that didn't match anything else down there. The carpet inside looked cleaner. Not new, but not worn down. The lighting was brighter, too. Not flickering or buzzing as much, just steady. There were shapes inside. First it looked like displays. Big figures standing in place, spaced out across the room. Bright colors, familiar outlines. Brian stepped in first. I followed him 2 steps in before I saw them clearly. Mascots. Not costumes or props. Full figures, 8, maybe 10 feet tall. Oversized versions of things you recognize immediately, even if you haven't seen them in years. Mickey, Donald, Goofy. Others behind him, harder to make out at first. They were standing in different positions around the room. Some facing forward, some turned slightly to the side, all of them still. The proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, head slightly too large, even for what they were supposed to be. The faces were stretched. Once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. But the eyes were the worst part. They weren't black or empty. They were glowing. A low, steady red, like something behind them was pushing light through them from the inside. Brian stopped moving. And that's when I remembered the rule. If you enter a room full of mascots, go to a corner and stay completely still. I didn't hesitate. I backed up slowly until the shoulder hit the wall, and then I moved sideways until I reached the nearest corner. I set my bag down without taking my eyes off the room, and I stood there, perfectly still. Brian didn't move right away. He was still looking at him, trying to figure it out. And that's a common mistake. Trying to understand what you're looking at instead of just following the rule. "Brian," I said. corner. Don't move, man." But he didn't listen. And one of the mascots shifted. It was small at first, a change in posture, like weight moving from one foot to the other. And then another one did it, and another. They weren't completely still anymore. Brian took a step back, and that was enough. One of them moved. It didn't cross the room the way a person would. It didn't run, didn't take steps you could track. It was just there, and then it wasn't. And then it was closer. Brian turned to run, and he didn't make it 3 steps. Something grabbed him from the side. A hand too large to be human, fingers wrapping around his upper body like it didn't need to try hard. It lifted him off the ground without slowing down. He didn't scream right away. That came a second later, and the sound cut off fast. You know, everything in you tells you to react, to turn, to step back, to do something. But the rule isn't complicated. Doesn't give you options. You just go to a corner and you stay perfectly still. So I kept my eyes forward, not locking onto anything for too long. You don't stare directly either. You track movement without focusing on it. That's something you learn without being told. The room changed. They were all moving now. Not fast, not like the first one. Slow, steady, repositioning, crossing the space in wide arcs, passing through areas where Brian had been standing seconds before. One of them dragged something across the carpet for a short distance, then let go. The mascots moved around the room, circling, adjusting, stopping, starting again. A few passed close to where I was standing, close enough that I could see details I hadn't noticed at the entrance. The stitching along the edges of their faces, the way their mouths were shaped behind the outer layer, teeth where there shouldn't be any. But I didn't react. I didn't even shift my weight. Time stretches in places like that. It could have been a minute, it could have been 10. You don't track it the same way you do outside. You just wait. Eventually the movement slowed. One by one they returned to positions that looked like the ones they started in. Not exactly the same, but close enough that if you hadn't been watching, you'd think nothing had changed. The room went still again. I waited longer. You always wait longer than you think you need to. When I finally moved, I did it the same way I got there. Slow and controlled, no sudden motion. I picked up my bag and I backed toward the entrance very slowly. The arrows were still visible from where I stood. And that's the only thing I needed. I stepped out, found the path, and kept moving. I didn't go back for Brian. There wasn't much to go back to. 2 days later, they sent me back in. Same round and room. Finish it, they said. I brought extra. When I reached the room again, it was empty this time. Except for what was left of Brian. I did what I was there to do, and I left the same way I came in. And I haven't seen that room again since. That doesn't mean it's gone. Just means it's somewhere else now. The rule isn't complicated. You don't run, you don't test it. You don't try to be faster than something that doesn't move the way you do. You find a corner, you stay still, and you don't move. Brian, well, he moved. And he is very dead now. Rule 4. If the lights turn red, leave immediately. The lights are the one thing you learn to tune out. They're always there. After a few runs, they become background noise. It doesn't happen often. Most shifts, the lights stay the same from the moment you walk in to the moment you come back out, hopefully. But when they change, they don't do it slowly. You don't get a warning. The run where I learned that was standard cleanup. Not deep or shallow, middle distance. They didn't tell me to bring extra, so I didn't. Just the usual gear, bleach, bags, gloves, and tools. The path in was clean. Arrows fresh enough that I didn't have to double check them. The kind of job you expect to finish in under an hour and forget about. The site was a single stretch of hallway. Long, straight, nothing branching off it. That's rare. Most areas down there, they twist or they split, but this one ran in one direction with no interruptions. You could see the end of it if you stood in the right spot. The floor wasn't clean. Not in a way I hadn't seen before, just heavier than usual. Spread out instead of contained. That's worse. It means more time in one place, more passes with the same tools, more chances to lose track of where you are. I set my bag down and started working. I was about halfway through when the lights flickered. That's not unusual, happens sometimes. Quick drop, then they stabilize. I didn't look up right away, I just kept working. And then they flickered again, longer this time. I stopped, looked up, and the lights weren't white anymore. They were red. Every fixture along the hallway had shifted at the same time. Same color and intensity. No flicker now. Just steady red light stretching the length of the corridor. Everything looked different under it. The walls weren't yellow anymore. They were darker, uneven. Like the color wasn't holding properly. The floor looked wrong, not just the parts I was working on, but everything. And that's when I dropped what I was doing. You don't finish the job, you don't pack up neatly, you just leave. I grabbed my bag, left the rest where it was, and I moved to the nearest arrow. The path back was the same one I came in on. That's what it looked like. But under that light, it didn't feel the same. The hallway seemed longer, the arrows further apart, the corners sharper than they should have been. You don't stop to check or verify, you just move. Fast enough to get out, not fast enough to lose your footing. I followed the arrows to the first turn, then the second. I heard something behind me. I didn't turn around. You don't turn around unless you have to. That's another thing you learn. Most of the time, looking doesn't help. It just confirms something you already know you didn't want to see. I kept moving. Another turn, another stretch. The arrows were still there, still the same color, still the only thing that didn't change. I followed the arrows. I stepped into the final stretch. Then the door was there, same as always. I crossed through it and shut it behind me. And nothing followed. Everything stopped the second the door sealed. I stood there for a second, breathing, listening to the normal noises on the other side. When I checked my bag, I realized I'd left half the job unfinished. I didn't get paid. The next day, they sent someone else in to finish it. And they didn't come back. Rule 5. If you walk into a grocery store room, hide in the cereal aisle and stay low until it passes. You don't expect it when it happens. Most of the back rooms look the same, and then sometimes they don't. The first time I saw the grocery store room, I thought I'd come out somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Shelves. Real shelves. Fully stocked. Boxes, cans, packaging that looked normal at a glance. Bright colors, brand names you'd recognize. It looked cleaner than anything else down there. Organized. Aisles running straight, parallel, spaced out like an actual store. There were arrows leading in. That's the only reason I stepped inside. The rule wasn't explained, it never is. Just a line on the list. If you walk into a grocery store room, hide in the cereal aisle and stay low until it passes. I didn't question it. I moved straight for the nearest aisle marked with cereal boxes. The shelves were fully stocked. Cheerios. Stacks of them. Row after row, all facing forward like they'd been just set up. Not dusty, not damaged, just perfectly there. I dropped down low and I moved a few boxes out of the way, just enough to create space behind them. And then I crouched, keeping my head below the shelf line, and I held still. I didn't peek too high, didn't stand. I just stayed low and waited. At first there was nothing. And then I heard footsteps. Fast. Not controlled like a person walking. They were uneven, heavy, moving fast through the aisles without slowing down. The sound of something brushing against shelves as it passed. I didn't move. The steps got closer. Closer than I expected. And then I saw it. Through the gap between the boxes. Legs. Baggy white pants, kind of like a clown. Hanging loose around the legs. Moving too fast for the fabric to settle properly. There was something on them, dark, uneven, that stood out against the white. And then it stopped, right in front of me. I could see it clearly from the knees down. It didn't move, it just stood there. I stayed low. It was listening. It was waiting for something. I kept my eyes fixed on the same spot, not tracking it or trying to see more than what was already there. But it stayed longer than anything else I've dealt with. I didn't move. After a while, the steps started again. Fast. Same direction it came from. Same speed. Gone just as quickly. I stayed where I was. Counted in my head. Gave it more time than I thought I needed. Then more. When I finally moved the Cheerios boxes, I did it slow. Pushed the boxes back into place. Stood up just enough to see over the shelf and check the aisle. Empty. The room looked exactly the way it did when I walked in. I didn't stay. I found the arrows and I left immediately, and I haven't seen that room again. But I remember exactly where the cereal aisle was, and I remember how long it stood there, without moving. Rule 6. Everything in the back rooms is trying to kill you. The first 5 rules give you something to do. Follow, watch, leave, stay still. This one doesn't. It just removes the last bad assumption people bring in with them. Which is that something down there might not be all bad if you understand it well enough. Yeah, that's not how it works. There are no neutral spaces, no harmless rooms, no entities that can be ignored if you just keep your distance. If it exists down there, it has a function. And that function is to kill you. You start to see it in the work. Not in any one job, but in how the place behaves over time. Areas that were clean don't stay that way. Paths that were stable shift just enough to catch you if you rely on memory instead of arrows. Equipment left behind gets moved, not randomly, but in ways that put it in front of you again when it shouldn't be. Even the rooms that look like they're doing nothing, rooms that are empty, hallways that are quiet, still require you to follow the rules exactly. Because the moment you treat them like you're safe is the moment you stop paying attention. The job exists because people keep going in and not coming back. That never slows down. Doesn't taper off. There isn't a version of this where the place gets figured out and the work stops. I'm always going to have a job. There's always another call, always another section that needs to be handled, always something new that shows up where it wasn't before. You can clean what's there in front of you, but you're not fixing anything. You're just resetting a small part of it long enough for the other person to make it a little further before they don't. So you follow the rules. Not because they make you safe, exactly, you're not safe down there, but because they keep you from making the obvious mistakes. You don't test anything, you don't improvise, and you don't assume that something is harmless just because it hasn't done anything yet. Down there. That's the difference before finishing a shift and becoming the next one someone else has to clean up. If you think something isn't dangerous, well, that's when you die. And that's it, I guess. I mean, you'll probably never need any of this. As far as I know, there's only one active entrance in the US at a time. Moves every 6 years. We don't know how, and we don't know why, but it does. Right now it's here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In the back of a grocery store you've probably walked past without noticing if you live here. In a few years, it won't be here. So yeah, you'll hear about the Backrooms eventually. Online, stories, videos, people treating it like a joke or some kind of urban legend. That's fine, you know. Believe whatever you want. Most people do. But as far as I know, I am the only janitor on staff that has a long-term survival rate. Meaning, I'm the only one that's not dead yet. So you might want to listen to me. If you do ever come across it, whether it's here or somewhere else when it moves again, don't overthink it. Won't look special. Won't feel important. It'll just be a door where there shouldn't be a door. And a place that seems normal. A stockroom, a mechanic shop, maybe an airport. Maybe somewhere even smaller, like a closet. If that happens, don't try to understand it. Just follow the rules like I've laid them out, and maybe you won't die.
Story 1. Chemical Warfare.
What is that?
Francis whined from the back seat of the SUV.
Daddy, what is that? Do you know what it is?
Paul was sobbing in the seat next to her. But Frances was too busy staring out the windshield to comfort her little brother. I couldn't blame her. The yellow cloud that rolled towards us, obscuring the landscape, was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I leaned over the steering wheel, staring.
It's gonna be okay. We're almost home.
It reminded me of footage from the Middle East, where dust storms would kick up and send a wall of dust racing across the landscape, miles wide and 1,000 feet high. Denise was leaning diagonally from her seat, reaching back over the center console to grab Paul's hand in some semblance of comfort. But even she didn't keep her attention fully on our distraught son for long.
Maybe we should turn around,
Denise said to me, struggling to keep the fear out of her voice.
You saw the alert. Bombs could drop at any moment. What do we pay all that money for if we're not going to even use the bunker? What if the stuff is poison?
She whispered, so as not to scare the kids.
I've never heard of any weapon like that, and I would have. America stays on top of stuff like that. Besides, chemical warfare is outlawed by the Geneva Convention.
Still, as we approached the cloud, I turned off the air conditioner and slapped shut the vents within reach.
Kids, close your vents back there, okay?
I glanced into the rearview mirror. Both my teenage daughter and my preteen son were lost in their own little worlds. Francis staring out the window, and Paul still crying.
Francis!
I snapped. She turned and looked into the mirror.
Shut the vents back there, all of them.
Thankfully, the roads weren't too clogged, although many people were driving crazily. We'd seen several accidents already, but we were approaching our house on the 2-lane road now. I couldn't imagine what it was like in the city. Sheer chaos, probably. As I spotted our mailbox up ahead, one that Denise had made herself to look like a barn, I was overwhelmed with appreciation that we had moved out here to the country just after Paul was born. While we turned down the driveway, the yellow dust cloud enveloped the car. A smell like burning maple syrup with an undertone of bleach invaded the vehicle as I raced down our dirt driveway.
What's that smell?
Francis asked. I punched the garage door opener. Moments later, after the SUV was parked snugly next to Denise's Audi, I punched it again and watched the door close behind us. I shut the engine off. The ground vibrated from an explosion in the distance. It was really happening. America was under attack. I turned in my seat and looked at each member of my family as we unbuckled our seatbelts.
Okay, let's get to the bunker. Don't bring anything, only what you have on you. We have everything we need down there. We'll do it on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
In unison, we all jumped out of the SUV and raced into the house. Moments later, we were all in the basement, and I was punching in the code to the reinforced bunker door. The syrup bleach smell lingered in my nostrils as I ushered my frightened family inside. As I pulled the door closed behind us, another explosion shook the ground. This one was much closer. The lights in the bunker flickered and then snapped off, leaving us in utter darkness. Francis and Paul screamed. I wobbled, standing up from the couch where Denise, Francis, and Paul were huddled.
Are you okay?
Denise asked, taking her arm from around Francis and grabbing my wrist.
Yeah, just low blood sugar,
I lied. I hadn't expected the power grid to go down so quickly, but whoever attacked us had apparently hit a power station just as we'd stepped into the bunker. It was a miracle no one had fallen down the hard metal stairs. Thankfully, I had gotten my phone out, and together, Denise and I worked to comfort our kids at the top of the staircase. A few moments later, the self-contained, solar-powered generator kicked on. Emergency LEDs came to life, illuminating the stairwell, allowing us to walk safely down to the common room. That was 20 minutes ago. Now, I needed to get the strange syrup bleach taste out of my mouth. The bunker wasn't huge by any means. It consisted of 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a large storage room filled with supplies, a common room, and a small kitchen. Blinking and shaking my head, I tottered over to the kitchen, directly across from the common room. A turn of the handle had cold water flowing into the kitchen sink. I cupped some in my hands and splashed it over my face. Ever since getting down into the bunker, I had been feeling odd, tingly all over, and with a strange ball of dread in my stomach. The dread seemed separate from the fear I knew was normal during such an event. We were under attack by some unknown force, so it was normal to be afraid. But we were safe, and we could survive for a year in this bunker. Plus, I had every confidence in the might of the United States Armed Forces. The ball of dread in my gut had a distinctly different flavor from the general fear I was feeling at the sudden attack. I just couldn't place it. Like something dark and awful was forming deep inside me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The water helped. I pulled some into my mouth and allowed it to go up my nose so I could get rid of that syrup bleach scent that had been with me since that yellow cloud of what? Dust? Yellow dust?
Mark?
I jerked, straightening quickly and looking at Denise, who stood in the half-light between the kitchen and common room. Over her shoulder, I could see the kids huddled together, staring at us with terror-stricken faces.
What? You okay?
Denise took a small step toward me and reached out with one hand, but she didn't touch me. Water dripped from my face, soaking the collar of my shirt.
I'm fine. Why? You've been standing over the sink for almost 5 minutes.
I scoffed.
What? No, I haven't. What's wrong with you, Mark?
Denise asked, taking a step back, her tone sharp.
Nothing,
I said.
Mark!
Denise shrieked, cowering and backpedaling.
Mark, what's wrong with you?
Behind her, Francis and Paul both started screaming. The dread in my stomach expanded, sending tendrils of pain through me. Shouting, I doubled over, wrenching my eyes shut in pain.
Mark, no!
Denise screamed. I straightened and saw that Denise was standing next to the couch with an arm around each of our 2 children. They all looked completely terrified, their eyes seeming too large, their mouths too wide as they screamed and cried. But Denise's face changed as she leaned down toward Paul.
Mark, what's wrong with you?
She cried again, but she was smiling now. Smiling until she opened her mouth and put her teeth against the curve of Paul's head. The dread expanded again, feeling much bigger now, like it was taking over. This time, the pain was distant. I was too focused on what Denise was doing to pay it much attention. My wife steadied Paul's head with one hand and bit into his skull. Although she didn't break through the bone, she came away with a piece of his scalp in her mouth, jerking her head away as blood poured and my son screamed.
No, you bitch!
I shouted, rushing toward the 3 of them. They darted toward the stairwell, Denise bringing up the rear. But I caught up to them quickly enough. Denise was about halfway up the metal stairs when I reached out and grabbed her foot, yanking it as hard as I could. Her other leg straightened and then stretched out before her as I pulled her backward. She hit the stairs doing the splits, and I heard something in her other leg give way with a wet crunch. She screamed, but I kept pulling her leg. I dragged her to the bottom of the stairwell, appalled that she could ever hurt one of our children. I couldn't understand how she could do such a thing, and I knew I had to stop her. The dread swelled as I pulled her around the corner from the stairwell so the kids wouldn't see what I had to do. Denise screamed and fought as I shifted her leg under my armpit so she couldn't use it. I kept her face down to prevent her from effectively using her hands. I shifted forward, bending her back awkwardly, and slammed my foot down on the back of her neck. As a much bigger person than her, I had no problem keeping her leg clutched tightly in my armpit while I bore down with my foot, putting most of my weight through that limb. She kept fighting. Afraid one of the kids would come down into the common room and see, I decided to speed things up. I brought my foot off her neck and slammed it down again, feeling something crunch in her throat. She kept fighting, so I did it again and again, stomping on the back of her neck until she went limp. Huffing and sweating, I dropped her leg to the floor and looked around, momentarily confused. There was no more screaming. The bunker was silent except for my huffing and a sound like stomping on metal grates. Through the haze in my mind came the memory of my kids. Of course! I hurried over, remembering what Denise had done to Paul. I wanted to make sure he was okay and tend to his wound. But as I rounded the corner, a loud metal clatter came from the staircase. My daughter's body tumbled down the last few steps and came to rest at my feet. I stared down at her, unsure whether she was unconscious or dead. Her eyes were closed, and blood trickled from a gash in her forehead, surely from hitting the corner of a metal step on her way down. I dropped to my knees next to her, but before I could feel for a pulse, Paul shouted down from the top of the stairs,
Don't touch her! She's infected!
I flinched away from my daughter.
Infected? She tried to infect me!
Paul said.
So I pushed her!
I still hadn't taken my eyes off my daughter, but I saw what Paul was talking about now. She was infected. Something like black mold grew in pulsating splotches on her skin. Giving her a wide berth, I headed up the stairs and grabbed Paul by the shoulders.
Are you okay? Yeah, she didn't infect me. It's okay.
I looked at the side of his head, where my wife had bitten him, but there was no wound. I shook my head, confused. The mass of dread inside me pulsed, this time feeling like it was crowding all my internal organs against my ribs and flesh. My confusion seemed to float away. What mattered was that Paul was okay.
Let's go back down, I said. We have to stay down here, so we don't get infected too.
Paul gaped at me, but he said nothing. I took his hand and led him down the stairs. We moved past Francis's and Denise's bodies, sure to keep away from them. Denise, it seemed, was infected too. Yes, that was why I'd had to kill her. She would have infected me. I led Paul to the master bedroom and shut the door behind us.
There, we'll be safe in here.
Paul got somberly onto the bed. I sat on the other side of it, elbows on knees, as I faced the door, just in case. We sat in silence for a long time.
Dad?
Paul asked, voice choked with emotion.
Yeah? What's wrong with you? What are you talking about?
I asked, straightening and looking over my shoulder at my son. He was no longer sitting on the bed. He cowered in the corner, staring at me like I was a monster.
What's wrong with you?
He screamed.
Why did you kill Denise and Francis? Quiet,
I said, looking around.
They'll hear you. Dad! Dad, no! Dad, why did you kill them?
I looked at the bedroom door, feeling like the entire inside of my body was swelling out, stretching my skin. He's trying to get us caught, I thought. He wants us to get caught, because he's one of them.
Dad?
Quiet, I hissed, crawling across the bed toward my son in the corner. He only screamed louder.
They'll hear you,
I said, clamping one hand over his mouth and the other around his tiny throat. He screamed against my palm. It was too loud, much too loud. I squeezed and pushed him down to the floor. The stench of burning syrup and bleach remained in my nostrils as my son took his final breath. Then I was alone in the room, safe at last. I left Paul where he was and walked toward the door, thinking I needed something to eat. But as I approached the bedroom door, I passed a mirror on the wall. Jerking to a stop, I turned slowly and peered into the mirror. When I saw the person looking back at me, I screamed. Story 2. We found an underground bunker. Something evil lives in it.
I don't think there's supposed to be a road here.
I looked left and right down the narrow dirt road, wondering if we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Saul came crashing out of the brush behind me. I turned to look at him as I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Huffing, he yanked a severed pine branch from where it had snagged in his backpack strap and threw it angrily to the road.
I thought we were supposed to be following a trail. You've had me bushwhacking for the last 2 miles.
I couldn't help but smile.
There's a trail. You're just too damn big for it.
My half-brother brushed pine needles off him and shook his enormous head angrily. As a lineman for a Division I football team, it wasn't the hiking that got to him. It was the fighting his way through the trees.
How about we take this road for a while,
he suggested.
See where it goes. We can mark the trail here and come back to it.
I studied the map I'd downloaded onto my phone, unable to find any sign of a dirt road. Weeds and grass grew in a line up the center, indicating that it was in disuse. Taking pity on my brother, I agreed, and we started up the road. Not even a mile later, the road dead-ended at a wall of granite with a huge, rusted door set in the middle of it. Stopping in the middle of the road, Saul and I shared a look of excitement.
We have to check it out,
Saul said.
It's not every day you stumble across a freaking underground bunker. I couldn't have agreed more. I smiled and started forward. The door was hinged on each side, so it would open in the middle. One was fully closed, while the other was open about a foot. There was a complicated-looking metal handle on one side and a locking mechanism on the other, complete with a ring that would lock the two components in place when the doors were flush with each other. But there was no sign of any chain or lock anywhere. Still, I glanced at the ground and saw some tracks. I stuck a hand out and stopped my brother before we trampled them. Look. Imprints had been left in the dirt under the slight overhang that would keep that patch of ground out of the rain. The prints had been left by what looked like a pair of hiking boots. I guess we aren't the first here, Saul said, starting forward. Before I could stop him, he trampled the prints and opened one side of the door wide on squealing hinges. Shaking my head, I decided I was overreacting, my imagination getting the better of me. But I could have sworn the tracks only led inside. There were none coming out. The crunching of dirt under our boots soon gave way to the muted slap of synthetic rubber on concrete. About 20 yards into the bunker, the space opened up on our right in a large parking area. The walls were concrete, and large concrete pillars stood in a line, holding the ceiling up a good 15 feet overhead. The only vehicle in the place was an ancient-looking World War II-era Jeep. It sat on cinder blocks, its tires long gone. The hood stood propped open like the mouth of some prehistoric creature that had been fossilized and long ago untombed from its stony grave. We ventured over, our footsteps echoing down the corridor that stretched before us, off into a black void. The only thing left in the Jeep's engine compartment was the engine itself. Everything else had been stripped out, probably shortly after the Second World War ended. Saul slipped his backpack off and propped it against the Jeep. And the light coming through the door, I could see his smile. What are you doing? Let's explore for a bit. Leave our packs here to give our shoulders a break. I looked into the dark distance, thinking about the boot prints. I was being ridiculous. I just didn't see the outgoing prints, that was all. Besides, Saul was with me. While I was pretty average in every way, Saul could handle all comers. I'd seen the guy squat over 500 pounds before. He had hands the size of baseball mitts. Yeah, okay. I slid my pack off and dug out my flashlight. Saul got his flashlight out, and we ventured farther into the bunker, breathing the stale air and holding the dark back as we went. We heard the noise shortly after reaching the second floor down. The first floor, where we'd come in, held the parking area and a couple of offices before bottlenecking to a heavy-duty door next to a large elevator, both protected by a couple of Jersey barriers. I figured this place had been built for some heavy hitters in case of a bombing or an invasion. The Jersey barriers were where the foot soldiers would crouch to fire at the enemy, preventing them from getting to the door or elevator, the last line of defense. With no power, the elevator didn't work, but the door was standing open. Beyond was a stairwell that led down to another floor we were determined to explore. But as soon as we stepped foot on the second floor, we heard a strange noise that caused my skin to tighten. It sounded at first like a snicker, like something was laughing at us. When it repeated, I realized it wasn't someone laughing. Quite the opposite. It was someone sobbing in such an odd and sped-up manner that it sounded like a hyena laughing. Both Saul and I whipped our flashlights toward where we thought the source of the noise was. We stood in a narrow concrete hall that stretched both left and right, with doorways branching off it at regular intervals. Our flashlights were trained to the right, but they couldn't reach far enough to see the end of the hallway. Hello? Saul shouted, causing me to jump. What are you doing? I whispered, grabbing his arm. He looked at me like I was insane. Someone's hurt. We don't know that. What if what? He asked. Help me! I jumped again at the hoarse and pain-filled male voice that echoed off the cold concrete walls. Without another word to me, Saul started off down the hall. I'm coming! Admonishing myself for my cowardice, I hustled after Saul. But it wasn't out of any altruistic intention. I wanted to stay close to him because I knew he could defend himself. Where are you?
he shouted as I caught up to him.
Down here!
The man called.
In the bathroom!
Something clunked in the hallway behind us. We whipped around and pointed our flashlights that way, seeing nothing but empty hallway and dark doorways.
Hello?
Saul said. For the first time, I heard just a hint of fear in his voice.
We're here to help! Help me, please!
The shout got us moving again. Now we could see that the hallway took a sharp left up ahead. Saul kept his light on that, while I pointed mine into the rooms that branched off the hall. They were simple bedrooms, with ancient cots that folded down from the walls. Some of the rooms held crates or old equipment, but most of them were empty, except for the single, fold-down cot in each one. I sensed movement behind us and whipped my flashlight that way, glimpsing a figure darting into a room behind us.
There's someone behind us!
I whispered to Saul as we reached the left turn. We stopped again.
Are you sure?
I nodded.
He's in one of those rooms. He's following us. It's a he? What did he look like? Is he big? Does he have a weapon?
I shook my head.
I don't know. It was just a glimpse of his leg, I think. But it looked weird.
The strange sobbing resumed, much louder now that we were close. It sounded like the man was hyperventilating.
Listen, we're not here to start any trouble,
Saul said to the hallway behind us.
We don't care about anything but getting help for this guy, okay? So whatever you want, it's none of our business. We'll just get this guy and be on our way.
The hallway answered with silence. The man in the bathroom screamed for help again.
Did someone hurt you?
Saul asked, now calling out to the man in turmoil. There was no answer. Even the sobbing stopped. I thought maybe the man was dead. Then he called for help again.
What the fuck?
Saul said, shaking his head in frustration. I kept my flashlight pointed down the hall behind us, going over repeatedly what I had seen. The quick glimpse of a figure. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't a human leg I'd seen.
I think it's an animal,
I said.
What? What kind? Animals don't stalk humans. Maybe a cougar?
Saul shook his head.
Which room did it go into?
I pointed.
Fourth one down on the right. Stay here and watch my back. Shout if you see anything.
The injured man shouted for help from the bathroom again. Without thinking, I turned my flashlight that way, shining it down the empty hallway.
Hold on!
A squelching noise erupted from the direction Saul had gone. I turned and shone my flashlight on Saul's back. He stood on his tiptoes, shoulders hunched forward, his own flashlight held limply in his right hand. I blinked, trying to compute what I was seeing. Saul was twitching, his arms jerking and his body flinching back and forth. He dropped his flashlight, which hit the ground just a moment before his size 18 feet left the floor. That was when I glimpsed whatever was on the other side of him, previously blocked by his bulk. His attacker's feet weren't human, although they had 5 toes on each limb. Protruding from each toe was a curved black claw. The thing that came to mind was a bear's feet, but there was no fur, only gnarled skin so dark it was almost black. The ankle joints on each leg were thick with bulbous protrusions, as though tumors had sprouted there. My eyes traveled up, but the rest of the creature was blocked by my half-brother's body. Blood splattered the floor between the two of them. I took a step forward to help Saul, but as I did so, the back of his shirt poked out as if something sharp had just protruded from his body. And as blood soaked into the fabric of his tan-colored shirt, I knew that was what had happened. The shirt settled again, but Saul's body kept twitching in time to a horrific squelching sound. More blood splattered the floor, soon followed by a tangle of intestines dropping needily to the wet floor. I turned and ran, darting through the first door I saw, finding myself in a large bathroom with 5 toilet stalls, 5 sinks, and 6 showers.
Help!
I ran toward the man's voice, hoping he could provide some form of sanity for me to latch onto. I raced down to the showers, 3 on each side of the bathroom. I aimed my light into each of them until I found the source of the cries for help. But as I stood there, my light shining into the last shower stall on the left, I found myself frozen with terror. The thing in the shower wasn't so much a man as a pile of deformed body parts. My eyes glanced over him repeatedly, but for several long moments, I was unable to make any sense of what I saw. It was clear he had been severely injured, presumably by the creature that had just killed my brother, but there were other things wrong with him. As far as I could tell, the wounds that had been inflicted on him had partially healed, but not in any normal way. Growths of stretched maroon skin bubbled out from these horrific wounds. His left arm, which had been nearly torn off at the shoulder, now stuck up from his body at an odd angle, held there by bulbous formations of that bumpy, strange-looking skin. The right arm was still in working order, and he held it out toward me, begging for help. His right foot was gone, but the skin had fused with his intact left leg at the calf. His clothes hung in blood-stained tatters from his body, but I could tell that the strange growths weren't only confined to his injuries. His clothes bulged with protrusions nearly everywhere I looked. But it was his face that shocked me the most. It looked as if the creature had slashed him across the left side of his head. That entire side was a mass of dark, deformed skin. His lifeless left eye protruded from a small mountain of flesh next to his half-deformed nose. His right eye still blinked, and the emotion there affected me deeply as my gaze finally rested on it.
Help me,
he said, still breathing rapidly. As I opened my mouth to ask him what had happened, there was movement from the bathroom door. Turning my flashlight that way, I saw an enormous creature that had most likely once been a bear. It was deformed in places, although not as bad as the man lying in the shower stall. The bear's skin was dark gray, its eyes full of confused rage, its blood-covered mouth hanging open to reveal a deformed and bulbous tongue. It paused for a moment, turning its head slightly away from the light. Then it dropped onto all fours and rushed toward me. Panic gripped me as I spun, looking for some way out or something to defend myself with.
Get behind me!
The man said.
Get behind me now!
I had no other options, so in my panicked state, I did what he said, crowding into the shower, stepping on the man and tripping in my haste. He cried out in pain as I rolled over him. Then I was off and standing with my back in the shower corner. The bear creature stopped just outside the stall and reared up on its hind legs, letting loose a distorted roar that sounded as if it had come from deformed vocal cords. But it didn't move any closer. Its eyes looked from me to the deformed man and back again, its nose twitching. It roared once more, propelling the stench of rotten meat and slow death into my face. Then it backed away.
Can you carry me?
The man asked.
If you can carry me, we can get out. It won't touch you if you carry me. Why?
I asked, listening to the bear make its way back toward the bathroom door.
I'm bad meat,
he said, managing a little laugh at the end.
I've been down here for days, and the thing hasn't come near me since it first attacked. It did this to you? Can you carry me or not? Can you hold a flashlight?
I asked, pressing the tool into his right hand. He gripped it. I squatted and got my arms underneath him, feeling moisture pass from his skin to mine. I levered him up so he was propped on his one good leg. Then I put my shoulder into his stomach and got him into a firefighter's carry. He cried out as I lifted him, but after that, he quieted down and managed to point the flashlight at my feet, even though his arm was hanging down behind my back.
Go!
He gasped.
Hurry!
I went, taking little steps, hoping my back didn't give out. As I reached the hallway outside the bathroom, I saw the bear to the right. On instinct, I turned the other way, heading farther into the bunker.
Stop!
The man cried.
Not that way! There's some kind of chemical leaking out of storage barrels down there. You have to go the way you came. The thing is that way. It won't touch you, I promise.
I turned around and headed toward the bear creature. My heart slammed around in my chest as I faced off against the thing. I wanted to drop the man right there and run the other way, weird chemicals or not. But I doubted there was an exit that way. So I steadied myself and took a step toward the creature. It grunted and backed away, nose twitching. I took another step, and the creature kept its distance. I worked my way down the hallway in this manner until I came to Saul's body. I didn't want to look, but I had to navigate around the gory mess, clenching my teeth against my crushing sense of loss. Then I was past, and the bear had backed itself into one of the rooms on the right. The stairs were difficult, and by the time we reached the top, my legs were shaking. But there wasn't much farther to go. I could hear the bear behind us, but by then, I knew the man was right. It wouldn't attack. It was afraid of him. When we got outside into the sunshine, I turned and shut the main door to the bunker, shifting the handle so it was fastened. It wasn't locked, but I had to take the chance that the bear wouldn't be able to open it from the inside. I couldn't carry the man any farther. I set him down as gently as I could on the side of the road and then stood up. I wiped the sweat off my face with one hand. My eyes were stinging from sweat, so I wiped at them with the backs of my hands. It didn't help. I pulled out my phone, and as I stepped away from him, searching for a signal, I realized my skin was starting to burn where I'd touched the man. I looked down at my bare arms and saw little red bubbles slowly forming there. I could feel the man's one good eye on me, mouth open and anguish building. I looked at him. A single tear traveled down from his one good eye.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to see the sky one more time. I'm sorry.
I looked back at my arms, thinking about how he had mentioned dangerous chemicals. He must have crawled or limped into the spilled chemicals right after the bear attacked him, and he still had some of the stuff on him. The burn was turning into a searing pain that seemed to sink deeper into my arms, even as it traveled through my body. My skin bubbled more violently. I felt it happening on my shoulder, the side of my neck, and the ear that was pressed against him as I carried him. I cried out at the pain and fell to my knees. Then, as the burning started on my face, I recalled wiping the sweat away with the same hand I had used to secure him on the journey up. I blinked as blinding pain erupted in my eyes. The world went blurry as I rubbed at my eyes. The pain went to a crescendo. Then the world went completely dark, and all I could do was scream. Story 3. The Key to Survival.
No,
I said, shaking my head.
I can't do it again. I can't. I'll puke. So puke.
Lonnie said.
Once your stomach is empty, you'll have a little motivation.
I ignored Lonnie, still shaking my head, eyes fixed on Davian, who sat across from me in a reclining chair. His deep-set, dark eyes still exuded kindness and sympathy, but not so much as they had a year ago. Like all of ours, his face had grown gaunt from slowly starving. But he still had a commanding presence, and, as I had during every tribulation of the last year, I looked to him for reassurance. This time, there was little to be found.
You agreed?
Davian whispered, his voice seeming to fill the entire bunker, even though he wasn't at anything approaching full volume. Lonnie leaned over from his side of the couch and gripped my arm.
You don't do it. You don't eat.
My stomach, which had long ago gone beyond simple hunger, felt like a fist that kept tightening on itself, squeezing every molecule of air out as the minutes passed. The three of us spent most of our days in what passed for the bunker's living room, conserving our energy for survival. Sure, we got up to use the bathroom, and Davian got up to check the air quality sensors several times a day, but otherwise, we stayed put. We had read every book in the bunker many times over, had watched every DVD, listened to every CD, and played every card game. Now, all we did was sit and drift into our own little hunger-fevered worlds, until, of course, it was time to harvest. We did it once a week, taking turns. It was my week, but I couldn't fathom facing it again. I tried to jerk my arm away from Lonnie, but I didn't have the strength to succeed. And he hung on tight, digging his fingers into my minuscule muscle.
You know what happens when you don't pull your weight? We all agreed.
Lonnie sounded like a ghost, and I didn't dare look at him. His bulging eyes and protruding cheekbones only gave his rodent-like face a more disturbing quality that bordered on inhuman. But it was true. We had all agreed, even if that conversation, which had lasted the better part of a week, seemed like it had happened in a dream. We weren't the same people as we had been when we'd rushed into the bunker over a year ago. Not even close. We had gone from being co-workers employed by an uber-rich bachelor, to being rats trapped underground, struggling to survive.
What about the air?
I asked Davian.
Can you check it? I checked earlier.
Davian said.
It's still not safe. Check it again, please.
Davian sighed, and I thought for a moment that the former head of security was going to deny my request. But he stood up from the lounge chair and shuffled toward the control room. I got to my feet and followed him on shaky legs, head swimming from the exertion of standing. We passed the kitchen on the left and the pantry on the right, with its closed door. I did my best not to look at it. Soon enough, we were in the control room. Davian didn't bother sitting down at the chair in front of the computer. He woke the screen up, clicked around, and then brought up a digital gauge displaying a complicated set of numbers. He studied them for a moment as I stood by, hands clasped hopefully in front of my chest. When he shook his head, my hands dropped to my sides.
See?
He pointed at the screen.
It's still not breathable out there. I'm sorry. We're stuck in here for a while yet.
I hadn't understood how to read the numbers, even when my brain was operating at full capacity. Now, as I slowly starved to death, it was like looking at the stream of numbers from the Matrix and trying to make sense of them. It was impossible. But Davian knew. As head of security, he had been in charge of learning the system so he could teach Mr. Maddox. He stepped to me and grabbed my shoulder.
I'm sorry, Blaine, but you have to do it. It's your turn.
We shuffled back to the kitchen, where Davian left after a brief word of encouragement. I found the tray of supplies in their place on the stainless steel counter and picked them up, turning to the closed pantry door. My stomach clenched again, and I felt a watery looseness in my bowels. I shut my eyes and thought about that first night, when those of us remaining at work had received the emergency alert on our phones. It was Davian and Lonnie who had arrived at the garage first, even before Mr. Maddox. I stood with the cloth in one hand and my phone in the other, having been interrupted in the middle of polishing Mr. Maddox's orange Lambo. The two men ran through the open garage door and stopped when they saw me. We all shared a look. At first, I thought they meant to steal a car and drive off, but after a short pause, they darted forward toward the empty bay next to the Lambo.
Come on,
Davian said, grabbing my arm and bringing me over into the next bay, where there was a rectangular oil pit built into the garage floor.
Hey!
I stopped and turned at the sound of Mr. Maddox's voice as he hustled into the garage, looking like a frightened horse and holding a pistol, which he pointed at us.
You're not going down there, goddammit!
He shouted. I had no idea what he was talking about. Since I wasn't on the security team, I didn't know about the bunker. Not then. I was still trying to make sense of the seek immediate shelter alert I had received on my phone.
There's more than enough room and supplies to last us all months,
Davian said in a reasonable tone.
I don't give a shit,
Maddox said in his raspy old man voice.
It's my bunker. You're going to leave us out here to die?
Lonnie asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Mr. Maddox said nothing. He rushed toward us, wearing his evening getup, khaki pants and a sweater that cost more than my entire wardrobe. His pistol wavered as he came, but not by much. Davian still held onto my arm, and Lonnie stood beside him. The stairs down into the oil pit were just a few feet away.
Back up,
Maddox said, poking the air with his pistol. We backed up. Once he felt it was safe, he stepped between us and the oil pit, his back to the gap. He seemed to be studying us, and I saw his eyes soften as the moments stretched on. I was so occupied looking at Maddox and his gun, I didn't see the chef, Sonia, coming up behind him until she plunged the knife into the side of his neck. Davian jerked me out of the way as Maddox fired once reflexively, the bullet ricocheting off the floor nearby. He spun around, knife still sticking out of his neck, and attempted to shoot Sonia. Lonnie lurched forward and shoved Maddox, sending him toppling into the oil pit. He landed in such a way that it ripped the knife out of his neck and the gun out of his hand. We all stood around the oil pit and watched him bleed out. Then, As the ground shook with the first distant explosions, we came to our senses. Davian led the way, stepping through the puddle of Maddox's blood, lifting the secret trapdoor at the bottom of the oil pit and ushering us down to the bunker's entrance. He punched the code in and got us all inside. We thought for sure we would be able to come out in a month or two, max. That wasn't the case. Now, a year on, we'd completely changed. Those people who had all been united against Maddox were barely holding it together now. I thought about all this as I stood in front of the pantry door, although I tried my best not to remember. It didn't help things any. It made them worse. But I knew I had to do it, or I wouldn't eat. Composing myself, I stepped forward and balanced the tray of supplies with one hand while opening the door with the other. Stepping inside, I flipped on the light, illuminating Sonia, or what was left of her. We'd already eaten so much of her, but she had been the largest among us, with the most fat. We knew she would last the longest, as her body could use the fat as energy before it started to attack the muscle. Wearing only her stained and soiled underwear and a bra, she flopped around on the floor, fighting against her binds. But she had no arms anymore. They both ended at just beyond the shoulder joints in bandaged nubs. One of her legs was gone up to the knee, and the other was missing her foot. She shouted and grunted, but she couldn't make words because Lonnie had cut her tongue out long ago. We had split it. It wasn't much, but it was delicious. She stared accusingly with her dark eyes, shouting wordlessly, flopping around in smeared shit and piss. When we first endeavored to eat her, we had all agreed to take turns cutting and cleaning. But as the other limited provisions dwindled and our energy with it, we stopped with the daily cleaning. We just let her go to the bathroom in her underwear and only cleaned her once a week when we did the cutting. That was my first order of business, getting Sonia cleaned up so I could cut her without contaminating the meat. Only after I did the cutting would I feed her some rice and beans, the only two food sources we had left, aside from Sonia, of course. The amount that we gave her was well worth the fresh meat we got in return. The three of us had talked long and hard about it whenever Sonia was asleep for the better part of a week. Planning ahead was key. We couldn't wait until everything ran out to eat her. We had to plan ahead. We couldn't survive on rice and beans alone. Not for long. Sonia continued to yell and wiggle around, her eyes fixed on me. That was the hardest part. Looking at her eyes, feeling her eyes look at me. We had been friendly back before this whole thing. She had, on several occasions, snuck me some food from the kitchen. Twice, I let her drive one of Mr. Maddox's expensive cars while the boss was away. I had liked her back then. I still did. But I liked living more. As I pulled on gloves and set about cleaning up, the feel of her eyes on me was like two red-hot pokers pressing into my flesh. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. She wouldn't stop staring. Even when she tired herself out and stopped flopping around, she wouldn't stop staring. I felt the creeping hand of insanity gripping the back of my neck, and not for the first time. Last time, I had been tasked with cutting and cleaning. I had nearly taken the knife to my own foot instead of hers. But now, with those eyes, I couldn't concentrate. My stomach clenched impossibly tight, causing me to double over. Her eyes prodded me as I gripped my stomach with soiled gloves. They prodded me as I let out a whine. They prodded me as I hissed for her to stop looking at me. I reached absently for the knife, feeling them prodding all the time, accusing and blaming. Breathlessly, I gripped the knife in one gloved hand and pressed her head to the floor with the other. I looked into those eyes, those prodding, poking eyes, and I knew they had to go. The knife went in easily enough, slicing through eyelid and conjunctiva and cornea and lens and pupil. It came out covered in a red, jelly-like substance, but it went in again just as easily. Then there was the other eye to get rid of, and I did. I stabbed and stabbed until I could no longer feel those poking, prodding eyes. But by the time I was done, I realized I had gone too deep. Sonia no longer moved. Her chest didn't rise and fall. She was dead. I had killed her. I stood up and walked numbly out to the living room, knife still in my gloved hand.
Where's Davian?
I asked, seeing only Lonnie in the room. Lonnie glared at me with open disdain, sensing something was wrong.
He's in the bedroom, sleeping. Said he wasn't feeling good. What's wrong with you? I think we need to butcher and refrigerate her now. The meat won't keep for that long if we do that now. Freezer's still broken. Well, what did you do, Blaine? She wouldn't stop looking at me. Jesus Christ.
Lonnie stood up, swaying for a moment before coming toward me and grabbing my left arm. He dragged me into the pantry and looked at the mess I'd made. He turned to me, still gripping my left arm.
You fucking idiot! Now we have to butcher her! You better hope all the meat stays good with the goddamn freezer broken. Christ!
As he spoke to me, I could feel his eyes on the side of my face. I could feel them poking and prodding and blaming. I looked down at the bloody knife I still held in my hand. Then I looked up and met Lonnie's gaze, and saw Sonia's eyes staring back at me. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video. You can also check out some more of my animated horror stories right here.